I'm not a supporter of vouchers. I voted for the vouchers for Washington, D.C. because we're in total chaos there. And it's what the mayor wanted and what the city council wanted because they had to do something to improve their ability to educate their kids. But I'm of a different opinion about vouchers. I do oppose vouchers because I ask the people that ask me for vouchers, do you really want the government involved in your school? Once you start taking tax dollars money, they're going to tell you how to operate your parochial schools, your private schools, and all your special schools. That's a little extra that the individual parent, if he wants them to go to a different school, then they should be willing to pay for the public school and their own schooling. They say, well, that's not fair. And I'm saying, my wife is telling me I'm not close to this thing. Can you hear me in the background? Okay, bang, boom. But that's why I would like to suggest another thing we have to do in public schools. Where are we failing and why are we failing? And say, let's address that. I think that's really the big challenge to all administrators and educators. And is it because of the classroom size? Is it because you can't teach like you should be able to teach? Is it because of time? Is it the classroom structure? All those things should be analyzed. I hate interruptions in the classroom. I'd take every loudspeaker out of every classroom. That's the most disrupting thing in the world in a class. I don't think 45-minute class periods are good either. I mean, I go all down the line. We have to start addressing this issue because I don't like to see 600,000 engineers out of China graduating, and we're graduating maybe 150 to 200,000 engineers in America. We're doing something not totally correct. So let's look at that aspect. But vouchers, I'm not for vouchers. Thank you. Bob?
Well, obviously there's no constitutional authority for any federal funding, so I wouldn't be in favor of vouchers, although I think it's a fine idea on the state level. But let's talk about the idea of pre-K funding. My goodness, what are we getting into? More and more government control. Where is this money coming from? How do you expect to pay for it? It happens two ways. You increase taxes. Do you know what the average tax burden is for the American person? It's now 50% if you count state, local, property, and sales tax. Whatever the IRS bites out of my pocket, the others lower echelon government entities take it. My goodness, even God only wants 10%. We're still in the 20th century where the government was elevated to godhood. So we need to start having a far more humble understanding of what the federal government's role is. But when you take government funding, you take government dependency and control. You don't want that. I want our local school board to make these decisions. So we've got a situation here where all we can talk about is more funding. So if it's not come from taxes, where does it come from next? It comes from the Federal Reserve, which prints out basically monopoly money. In fact, Ron Paul said, this is getting to be so ridiculous. He just said this last week. Why don't we all have our own printing presses, make our own money, and then no one has to work anymore? You are destroying your own tax base for public schools by accepting federal funding in two ways. And one of them is, by the time the windfall comes through the Department of Education, by the time it trickles down, salaries cannot keep pace with the guarantee and the rise to prices. This is why I started teaching at $8,100 a year in 1974. Now I'm making, I don't know, $67,000, and I'm still in about the same amount of disposable income in goods and services. So what we've done here is created a self-feeding machine. We must figure it out that the federal government is not our friend in this.
Thank you. Liz.
Thank you. Senator Stevens would in general not support vouchers. I think that he also voted, as did Congressman Young, for the voucher program for the District of Columbia because it was requested by the city's administration and because that is such a dysfunctional school. In Alaska, certainly there are many, many options within the public school system that exist for parents to make decisions about educating their children, including charter and alternative schools, as well as homeschooling. And the dollars are so scarce for these programs because we're looking at a very large federal deficit that it's important to put those dollars where they can do the most good and continue to try and beef up the resources for our existing institutions.
Thank you.
Okay, our next question. And we will be starting with Don on this one. Okay. Many educators and policymakers believe that one critical step that can be taken to improve public education is to support early childhood education programs. How might the federal government more clearly define and articulate its responsibility to early childhood education?
Well, this is one that I may be agreeing with Bob. I think the real key to this is the local school districts and the parents. I believe in early education very strongly. And that is a decision the state has made. We have Head Start, we have pre-Head Start, we have education. But really, somehow along the line, we lost the idea that maybe there should be some parental involvement in starting education early. Instead of turning that television on, maybe I'm a dreamer. Maybe a little reading would help out. A little bit of activity, interchange with one another would be very helpful. Maybe a class for parents on how to pre-educate their children. Maybe they wouldn't attend, maybe they would, I don't know. But I am saying that the federal government set a policy, we're going to now train young people because of the government standard is a dangerous precedent to be setting. You think about that a moment. How far down the line, and I agree with Bob on this one, how far down the line do we wish to go in this arena? The state has a responsibility. I'm frustrated in the state because of the lack of investment in the state. There's less money being spent now percentage-wise. When I first went to Juneau, we spent more money, and we didn't have the oil money, percentage-wise, on our students in our schools. We're spending a lot of money now, percentage-wise it's down. Are we getting the results? Let's look at it. Now, we do get some great results, I must tell you that. I have had over 7,000 close-up students come to see me back in Washington, D.C., and I am extremely proud of them. They're very bright, young people. I'm still worried about those that didn't come and those that have not made it.
Okay, thank you, Don. Bob?
Well, Horace Mann, supposedly the great educational reformer of the 19th century, and I've had to unlearn many things about our great 19th century reformers. Horace Mann was one of them. He, in fact, went to Germany and saw a very, very militaristic Prussian school. And they were disciplined, and it frightened him that, holy smokes, these kids had a complete and utter recollection, and they looked very impressive. So what he did is that he wanted to bring this same system back to the United States, which basically let education find its own way. Abe Lincoln, we all know he had less than a year's worth of schooling. He taught himself. He read Shakespeare, he read law books, he had to pass a bar exam. It doesn't, you can educate yourself a lot of different ways. And strangely enough, and I'm no fan of Lincoln, by the way, but he was able to get himself educated. Fantastic. Okay, so Horace Mann sold the idea that the state is partially owner of your children. It is a monstrous idea when you realize this. From age 6 to 16, I believe in 1901 or 1903, the last state passed the mandatory 6 to 16 attendance and education. Well, families didn't really bother that too much because they had the ability actually to control their schools, which had a huge Judeo-Christian ethos as part of the educational process. Well, we've lost that ethos now, I don't deny it. But now here we are, the premise of the question is that we need to have more and more government control and oversight of our children before they even go to kindergarten, which means kiddie school in German. I mean, that was like the preschool at the time. Now, gosh, we got to have pre-K funding, listen to Mark. It's going to mean more and more federal control and government control in our lives. There is no substitute for the family. You can bring in all the school psychiatrists you want and have all the counselors. You cannot substitute the family. You need to restructure the family that is outside the purview of government.
Thank you, Bob. Liz?